I'm going to calling this, sorry, calling for technical support. And how do I get the chat back up so I can see it? Now I have no audio. Now it's working. Why is that? Okay, the audio is working. How do I get the chat up? Calling for technical support. How do I get the chat back up? Okay. Okay. Oh, there. We got somebody. Okay. Sharon. Hi, Sharon. All right. Thank you, honey. I think we got it figured out. Thanks. This is Angus, my technical support. Thanks, honey. Okay. Hi guys, I am so sorry for that. I am much better with dirt than with technology, so I apologize. I understand that was terrible. And I had to reach out to my 16-year-old son, Angus, because he knows how to do the technology part, and he's not here right now. He's back in Calgary. So welcome. Hi everyone. Hi Ian. Hi Sharon. It's great to see both of you here. And I will say hi to Angus for you, Sharon. Hopefully he is 16, so he's a little more shy about being in front of the camera than he used to be with my older videos. But thank goodness he still wants to be involved because he really helps me get it all set up here. So today we're coming from the greenhouse in the sky in Golden. I apologize. I did want to do a live stream for you all from Springbank last week, but the Wi-Fi there is just not capable of keeping up with this. So I'm afraid that I'm only going to be able to do for now until we get it sorted out, streaming from the greenhouse. And I'm hoping to answer your questions today. I did want to focus today on different strategies for growing in harsh conditions. But obviously, if you have questions along the way, I love responding to them right away. So just put them in the chat there, and I'd be really happy to answer those questions as well. First off, I hope you guys can see, we tried to do the lighting just perfect. So you can see that we got lots actually growing right now in the greenhouse. It was 32 degrees in here today. So that's pretty exciting. We actually had to cool it off a bit so that I could work in here. And another few really exciting sort of developments is I saw my first few hoverflies in here today, two different varieties. So we got multiple populations of beneficial hoverflies that are surviving in here. They did not come in from outside, although these are ones that are actually being generated here in our own greenhouse. And I also saw my first mason bee in here. So those of you who follow me know how much I love all these beneficial bugs. And I've had folks say, well, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And one of the things that I'm focusing on more than anything else is maintaining the biodiversity in here. So while that might seem like I'm going off on a segue about my beneficial bugs, that's actually the main thing I focus on in terms of maintaining a healthy garden in a harsh condition, because it's that biodiversity both above the soil and below the soil that's going to help your crops be more resilient to erratic changes. It's sort of a theme throughout everything I do. Whenever I'm about to try a new project or take a new step in the gardens, and like I said, I'm doing this in two different homesteads, both zone 3, different conditions. I got Chinooks in Springbank. We don't really have Chinooks here in Golden, and the growing season is a little bit longer here in Golden, which surprises a lot of people. It's actually easier to grow food in Golden than it is in, say, Cochrane or Springbank. Even though we're on a mountain, like you're literally on the mountain, it's better growing conditions here than back on the other homestead. And but I still focus on, and this is something that I've learned through trial and error over many years of growing in the Calgary area to start, that the conditions are so erratic there that it's hard for a lot of plants to grow. The Chinooks are a huge issue for those folks, especially if you're interested in growing things long term, like perennials. Those erratic temperature shifts and changes can actually kill off your perennials because you get false spring and stuff emerges, and then it's -30 the next day, and those plants can tend to die, especially perennials. When I worked in a greenhouse industry, invariably we'd have people coming in and replacing a bunch of their zone 3 perennials, even because they hadn't done anything to protect those perennials from the erratic temperature changes that happen with Chinooks in the Calgary Chinook area. So I have devised a little way of remembering my strategies for dealing with harsh growing conditions. And it's the 5 C's. It used to be 3 C's, but I'm noticing that, oh, geez, I can call that a C too. And now I have 5 things that I'm always focusing on in terms of helping my gardens to thrive in harsh conditions. So these all relate, though. If we were to break it down to one thing, it'd be biodiversity. Okay? Biodiversity. Stay away from monoculture, stay away from doing things like baking your soil. You want to maintain the life in your soil and the life above your soil in as biodiverse a fashion as possible. That builds resiliency, drought protection, all sorts of things. I'm going to go through that all as I'm going. And as I said, if something I say is like, what is she talking about? Please let me know in the chat and I will be happy to elaborate. Or if there's something you'd rather hear about, I'm open for that too. So first up, the number 1 C in terms of dealing with temperature changes and erratic temperature changes, I would say would be coverings. I call it coverings. And that can be as simple as the old milk jug method, because in a way that's providing a covering and a mini greenhouse, or using a row cover, or you can take it to as simple to or as elaborate as you want to go. Simple level is things like just throwing row covers over your plants. Then you can go up to things like, and see that you could build structures much like this. A lot of people will do that. They will cover their greenhouses, well, their raised beds with hoops like this, and then it's easy to drape coverings over that. So if, for instance, you're planting tomatoes in Springbank or Cochrane or Calgary, and it's August 29th, and your tomatoes are looking gorgeous, and you look at the forecast and it says it's going to be -2 tonight. This is not a made up scenario. This is not fiction. This happens often in that region. Having a structure up on your raised beds, and that's another reason why I like raised beds. It's easier to do these quick remediation fixes when we have major changes in erratic temperature. And being able to throw something over and sort of strap it into place is going to help to maintain the heat in that bed to get your tomatoes to the night, so you're going to be able to extend your season, because you know what's going to happen in September. It's going to be gorgeous again. You're going to have 3 nights of frost where if you didn't protect everything, it all dies, and then you'll have perfect growing conditions throughout the month of September. It's frustrating, but if you set something up so that you can cover in advance, not trying to run, you might wonder, like, why is this up here all the time? These, having some sort of trellising, some sort of hooping, something you can quickly throw things over, will be your lifesaver when it comes to the erratic temperature changes. Another type of covering that you might want to consider is grow. If you want to take it a little step further, have something a little more permanent, is doing cold frames. That's an excellent way. And it's a great way to also start things earlier. You could do the same thing I just discussed. If you had, this is old PVC pipe, right? I just need some technicals. Yes, PVC pipe that we've just popped into our raised beds here. I'm able to start growing things early in here because it's a geothermal greenhouse that's pumping nice temperate air through here all the time. So I got stuff growing in here year round. I don't have that in Springbank. With my Springbank gardens, what I often will do is I'll have raised beds, and I'll have plastic over those raised beds that I start. It also helps to get the soil to warm up a little bit quicker, and I will have clear sheeting over this, and then I can start growing some of my cold hardy crops up to weeks earlier than, and sometimes a month earlier than if I was just to leave this exposed. Trapping that heat that comes in during the day with the thermal mass of the raised beds underneath plastic, it's a significant thing. So think about your coverings. Obviously, the ultimate covering is a greenhouse. Greenhouses are not cheap. They do cost a lot of money to make, but if you are somebody who's obsessed with gardening like myself, I've built several greenhouses from tiny, easy little ones that I made from literally scrap plastic and scrap wood. That was my first one that I built in Springbank, to this wonderful thing, which I didn't build, but I did get to put lots of input into how it would be built. And now we can do 4 season growing. So coverings is important. Then you also need to consider covering your soil. I know a lot of folks are reluctant to use mulch because they're afraid of attracting some of the things of attracting things like slugs. Yes, I do get slugs in here. My ducks are very happy I get slugs in here, and as long as I keep on it, I can pick them out and just feed them to my ducks, and they're very, very happy about it. In my garden, in Springbank, when I had the ducks there, I would just let them in, and they would take care of the ducks of the. Oh, I got a question. Isn't plastic? Oh, sure. That's an excellent question. Isn't plastic covering a no-no? Excellent question. It would be a no-no if you had it right on the soil. I for myself, okay, I'm kind of, just in case you didn't notice, I'm sort of a hippy dippy kind of gal. I really like to keep things natural, and putting plastic covering directly on the soil is, yes, a very bad idea. You're going to kill a lot of the wonderful biodiversity in the soil, and you might have leaching into the soil, all those bad things. But a clear plastic coating on top of your hoop, you've created a mini greenhouse. If it's not on the soil, if it's raised above the soil, it's going to help to trap some of that heat during the day. So, yes, like a lot of people I know, another thing I really hate, and I know a lot of people won't like me for this, is I hate that black the stuff that they sell supposedly as a weed killer over and a weed deterrent. That's going to biodegrade into your soil, well, disintegrate into your soil and put a lot of crap into your soil as well, and kill some of the biodiversity of your soil. So I would not put plastic. I did it once before I started learning about biodiversity. I will admit that at one point, when I was almost 20 years ago now, and I was growing potatoes in Calgary for one of the first times after growing up on a potato farm in Delta where they just grew with no help at all. I had read a technique where I put black plastic on top of my raised beds. It did warm the soil up quicker. No, of course, it did do that. And I just cut holes and I put my potatoes in. And yes, the potatoes did come up nicely and a lot sooner. But the soil itself, after I harvested the potatoes, had to be completely remediated because everything that was in that soil prior to me putting the black plastic on there was dead. Okay, I hope that answers your question. And if I haven't been clear enough, Sharon, have just let me know, and I will continue to try to elaborate. Okay, so we were talking about coverings. Ah, yes. So this is a good segue though, because black plastic on soil, bad. Mulch on soil, good. It does help to trap the moisture in the soil, which if you live in a really um, drought, an area that's more likely to have droughts like Calgary, Cochrane, Springbank, having mulch on your soil, the amount of moisture it can help to maintain within your soil and stop that evaporation happening quickly. It also, the other thing that the mulch does, it also helps to maintain the biodiversity within the soil. When I used to work in landscaping, one of my favorite things to see is my mycelium growing on the mulch, because I knew that that garden was gonna be have great nutrition exchange and everybody was going to be happy. And some of my clients would be like, "Oh, can you please get rid of that white stuff?" And I'm like, "No, that's your best friend." Like that, I know that you think that that's bad, but it's actually when you see mycelium, that white fluffy stuff growing and it smells like it smells like mushrooms because it is related. It's where mushrooms are the fruiting body of mycelium. You will, that's good. That means your garden has got good nutrition exchange and it's going to be far more resistant to things like drought if you've got good, healthy mycelium in there. And mulch helps maintain the moisture. Fungi likes a little bit of moisture. So do consider, so when I'm talking about coverings, I'm talking about coverings above ground to help trap heat and below ground, well, and right on the ground to help maintain the biodiversity and the moisture of the soil. Okay, so that's C number one, coverings. Okay, C number two. C number two. Yes, compost. I love compost. I am I it's it my friends laugh at me because I'm one of those people who would literally when I see healthy compost, I cannot help myself. I gotta like I've been known to like nosedive into compost because that wonderful humusy fluffy goodness, there's really nothing better on the planet for your garden. A lot of people, though, are really trapped in looking at the I know people who actually will take that compost and try to determine what the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium levels are in. And they're like, no, it's not really that high. Yes, compost itself usually doesn't have a whole lot of like crazy amounts of those nutrients, but what it does contain is a whole bunch of healthy, biodiverse fungi, bacteria, um, and all these other wonderful things like mold, even molds and mildews, which I know you might in our brains we've been trained to think that those are bad things, but there's more of good stuff, more 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 healthy forms of bacteria, more healthy forms of fungi, more that actually help our gardens than the bad stuff. So compost has lots of that. The other thing it does is adds it's got a lot of moisture wicking. Moisture is your friend for keeping things alive and keeping things going with your plant roots. It usually can help to aerate your soil, like adds a little bit of fluffiness to your soil compared to a lot of the dirt that you just like just straight good old dirt. Um, Putting compost on good straight, like even if you just got topsoil and you add some compost, you can probably get away with growing a garden in that. Oh, I see another question. Best mulch, please. Perfect question. And that's going to go at compost. And honestly, what I use for mulch, I'm going to show you right now. I'm going to pull a little mulch that I got on my bed here. It's dead plants. Okay. What I do when I am mulching my garden, I tend to do spring bed, well, fall bed prep and spring bed prep. And I believe in the no-till method quite a bit because I do want to maintain the biodiversity within soil. It's almost, I think of what of the soil as a little city. Okay, there's a city going on with towers and all sorts of stuff, and there's all sorts of wonderful creatures living in that city, and wonderful bioorganisms all working together to create this wonderful network of nutrients that's going to transmit to your plants. So, if you take the dead plant matter at the end of the season. You don't want to till because then you're going to be breaking up a lot of these networks. But if you chop or carefully pull out dead plant matter and just put it on top of the soil that it grew in, okay, what's going to happen? Two things are going to happen. It's going to act like a mulch. It's going to maintain the moisture within your soil. The second thing that's going to happen is through the winter, the snow is going to come down and it's going to percolate onto the dead things you place on top of the soil down into the city. Okay, it's like having a light rain of nutrition coming down into the city. So for instance, right here, what do we got here? This looks like a nasturtium. This is what a dead nasturtium looks like. They're wonderful as a living mulch. That's another thing you might want to consider doing is with companion planting, and I'm going to talk about that in a bit. That is a living mulch that's helping to retain. But the dead nasturtium is a good dead mulch because this I literally pulled a nasturtium plant right from this and just plopped it on top. And this now this the nutrition that was in this when we water it, or if it was outside in the snow, would be percolating back down into that biodiversity below. Okay. Oh, we have another. Oh, no, I got.
Next mulch, please.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. This is the best mulch, dead plant matter that grew up there. Now, if you don't, and then what I'm going to do is once I've got this replanted the second time around, like for the next season, that is going to go into my compost and it's going to become my dries. Because when you're building compost, there's a few things you want to keep in mind. You want to keep it in contact with the soil. This is going to make some people unhappy because I know a lot of people like their like ones, their big rollers and stuff. I'm not a fan because I find that I get my best compost when it's touching the ground because that allows the things that are in the city and that ground to come up and go into my compost and start breaking it down. So if I have, when I'm building a compost bin, I always make sure it's at least 1 meter by one, like a cubic meter. And the reason for that, which ironically works out great if you're using, say, um, like pallets, those usually, if you build yourself a nice cube, I also usually do 3 in a row so that I can sort of move down as it's biodegrading. But make sure if you want to have good decomposition happening, having it on the ground and having it be at least a cubic meter so it's big enough to build up a thermal mass that'll cause enough energy and heat in there to actually decompose things, it's going to work a lot better. When I, in the spring, like let's say, for instance, I planted a bed over here today. I planted up a companion plant by it, which I'll talk about in a minute. But a couple weeks ago, before I knew I was going to plant, I put a layer of compost down there and I also put more mulch on there. The other good thing about using this dead plant matter as your mulch is that's providing habitat to the wonderful beneficial bugs that are going to be helping your garden on top. So, for instance, I saw hoverflies today and I'm elated, and I saw mason bees today. These the hoverflies would have laid their egg, well, their larvae after the eggs are laid on the leaf and they do all the wonderful job of eating pests on the plant. When the larvae are ready to pupate, they crawl down the plant and they go into that top layer of mulch and they wait to they turn into a pupae and then they form into a full grown hoverfly. So if you look around my garden, you might think it's really messy because there's all this dead plant stuff around. And but what that's doing, it's got multi purposes. It is mulching, it's providing nutrition because the stuff is draining, the nutrients that are draining down, and it's providing habitat to mason bees and bumblebees and spiders and my hoverflies. So that's what I like to use for mulch. Now, if you don't have stuff like that, just make sure that you're using something that doesn't have, like I know there's a whole industry based on red and black colored wood mulch. And it might look pretty, but when you use those as your mulch instead of natural like cedar mulch that's just shave or just wood shavings, that black and that red artificial dye in there is actually killing the biodiversity of the soil. So it's taking away one of the major factors you want to use mulch. It's looks might look more uniform and pretty, but it's actually making it less effective. So I hope that that's helpful. Compost, I like to apply. I know a lot of people only apply it once a year. I try to apply it as often as possible. Like I usually, especially on my perennial beds, because they're heavy feeders and they feed me, I want to feed them back. I will usually apply a layer in fall. As I'm like pulling up all the dead plant matter, I put compost down and put the dead plant matter on top of the compost. And then I usually apply another layer. I'll lift all this up and apply another layer about 2 weeks before I intend to plant in the spring. Now, what I also do, especially outside, I know like right now, I left Calgary, well, I left Springbank yesterday and it was glorious. Like it was beautiful weather. I was outside working, but I wasn't starting on my garden beds yet because it's too early. The beneficial buggies are still sleeping right now. I have sort of a rule of thumb and I look at nature to give me cues as to when it's time to actually start planting. So when I start noticing actual true buds on trees, when I have counted at least 10 ladybugs and I've seen at least 2 mason bees, and usually I see the bumblebees pretty soon after that as well, that is when I start disturbing my beds and planting things in at the spring bank. Well, actually anywhere. I'm seeing them here and here right now, but that's just because we're lucky enough that we have this year-round growing space. Okay, so we've talked about coverings, we've talked about compost. Now, one of my favorite things to do to maintain the resilience of my gardens, and also to help if something goes wrong, because invariably, no matter what you do, you will probably have certain crops that are going to fail every year. So they're just conditions just weren't right for something, and it's going to change every year. But if you companion plant, and that means using the same amount of space and planting things together, you're going to have less, you're going to build both build resiliency and abundance into your garden. Oh, I'm seeing another one. My beds are full from previous comp. How can you keep adding more? Remove old top layers. So, Sherry, your beds aren't sinking a little bit every year? That's amazing because usually what happens is when you're planting, some of the mass that your plant is coming from your soil. So if you're intensively planting like myself, you probably will notice that your raised beds are going to shrink a little bit every year. So if they're extra full like that, it's a really good question. And so you're asking, I would maybe you want to skip a year and just make sure you mulch well on top, because you don't want to have things overfilling and you don't want to remove the biodiversity that's right in your beds right now. So maybe that might be a good idea not to, like like I say, I do it in the fall and the spring. If I had that problem, which I never have had, I've always actually, my friends will tell you, I'm always like, where's the best compost? If I don't have enough, I'm looking for compost, good compost all the time. Mushroom compost, by the way, is excellent. If you can get a hold of any of that, that's the one I recommend the most because it is so good at water retention, and it also has mycelium already in it, right? So that's another compost thing. But yeah, maybe Sharon, if I were you, I wouldn't put compost on in the spring here, but do still do your mulching. Okay. Um, I think that's, oh, pardon? Oh, yes. So I just got reminded. Oh, and actually, I just got a tip from somebody who refuses to be on camera, but built this beautiful greenhouse. He's right. What I would do if I were you, if you want to boost the nutrition, but you don't have room for more compost, is you can make compost tea. And compost tea, I take a big burlap sack, like the ones that you get coffee beans in. We managed to get a hold of some big, and I call it my tea bag. It's my big tea bag. And I put the weeds in that I have seeds because I don't want to put that in my compost. I put the weeds in that propagate from roots. So that ugly, awful quackgrass that we all hate so much, I'm not putting that in my compost, okay? Because I don't want that to spread through my compost. Um, and sort of things, so seeds and stuff that propagates from roots, I put that in the big tea bag. And then when that's full, I stick it in a big barrel of water and I let it steep like a tea bag for at least a few weeks. This last batch, we let it go for a couple of months. And let me tell you, it's rich. And and what, oh, comfrey. Yes, he pretends he doesn't know about gardening, but honestly, he knows a lot. Comfrey and burdock are really good qualifiers for this because they tend to take over, and they're excellent for compost tea. And then what I do is I once it's gotten really stinky and gross, what I'll do is I will put it into a jug and I'll fill the jug 1/4 with the stinky tea, the rest with water, put a little perforated nozzle on top. If you water your garden bed with that, like right, like let's say you wanted to, you could use that instead of a solid compost, and it's going to do a lot of adding both biodiversity and nutrients to your soil. So yes, that's a very good question. That's a very good way to deal with what you've got going on, Sharon. Okay, so we've talked about compost. We've talked about, oh, when it comes to compost also, I know a lot of people really focus a heck of a lot on having this mix of half and half browns to greens. And I used to worry a lot about that myself. Instead, what I worry about more is adding variety. As long as I don't, like, I used to try to make compost just out of chicken manure and it worked, but just using straw and chicken manure, like the, sorry, I should say, just making compost out of the chicken, like whenever I clean out the chicken coop, I'd make great compost out of that. But when it started getting really good is when I started adding everything else into it. So I'm constantly looking for lots of variety. Don't just try to build your compost out of, say, your leaves that you rake up, which I don't do, by the way, because it's mulching my ground. But if you're a leaf raker, leaf raking and dried leaf rakings and say your kitchen scraps as your greens, it's not going to, where you're going to get your best compost is when you have a whole rich variety, biodiversity, this is a running theme here, going into your compost. You're going to get better biodiversity out of it too, and better nutrition, better balance in your nutrition. So we talked about compost. We talked about com we've talked about coverings. Now we're going to talk about companion planting. And that's one of the reasons I started planting here today. What happens with companion planting? For instance, if this bed right behind me here, this is currently my garlic bed. I've got garlic and a little bit of orash growing in there now. And in a few weeks, because we have started our tomato seedlings here in the greenhouse, when they start getting some true leaves, we're going to put tomatoes in there. So all in this, a lot of people would be really happy with just having, there's literally 100, potentially 100 heads of garlic that are going to come out of here. But I'm also got my orash in there. And so I'm going to get a whole lot of greens coming out of there. I did plant the orash quite dispersed. I didn't want it to interfere too much. And then I'm going to add the tomatoes in there. And I'm going to get a lot of tomatoes out of here too. The garlic is actually going to help to protect my tomatoes from some of its major pests. All right. Garlic and tomatoes really love each other and they have similar, they're good companion plants. Now, another one that I just planted today is another one of my favorite compounds, and that's this one just behind it. That is the potato, corn, and bean bed. So I get so we did that was this bed here. That's what I had planted here earlier, and the amount of food I got out of this one bed by planting corn, potatoes, and beans together was ridiculous. So because corn and potatoes don't interfere with each other, the corn I can plant it really densely in there. Still plant my potatoes densely, and then the peas, well, the beans, because peas and potatoes aren't the best of friends. The pole beans love both of those and are nitrogen fixing for both of those. The beans love the corn because they go up there, and then the potatoes are really enjoying the nitrogen that the beans are fixing to the soil as well. And then when I and that's all just going to be dropped down there in when the bed is done as well. So there's multiple reasons for companion planting. You are you're different plants take different things in the soil and also add different things to the soil. So by if you're going with monoculture, you're only drawing the same plant, same nutrition from that soil throughout the whole season. Whereas if you do polyculture or companion planting, there's a little bit more balance there. You're not going to have to add artificial fertilizers to your soil in order to maintain a healthy, like I don't usually have to fertilize my soil during The growing season itself, I do use the compost tea when I can, but you're not going to get a depleted soil because these plants are all adding and drawing different things. Now, the other major reason is for pest control. Because when you're doing monoculture, and if especially if you're planting, you're basically saying to the plant, here's your favorite food, come and eat all of it. But for instance, one of the ones that I really love to do is with cucumbers. I always grow with nasturtiums for two reasons. The nasturtiums, as I mentioned before, they make an excellent ground cover. They act as a living mulch. So they're helping to maintain the water retention, keeping the soil also at an even level. Because those of you who grow cucumbers know that they are the prima donnas of the plant world, and they do not like a lot of variability. They like things to stay pretty consistent. So by planting a living mulch around it, you're helping to do that. The other thing is they're attracting the aphids. Nasturtiums are a wonderful companion plant as an aphid trap. And I plant nasturtiums all over the place because, for instance, with my peppers, because if you grow peppers, you know that aphids love nasturtiums. Well, sorry, you know aphids love peppers, but if you plant the nasturtiums, they're more likely to go onto your nasturtiums than your peppers. They will still go on your peppers. That's why you want lots of hoverflies around because they love to take care of those for you. Well, their larvae do, but the nasturtiums will help to draw away some of those aphids that would be attacking your peppers. So the multiple reasons for the companion planting, the different nutrition. Now let's say my potato, corn, and bean crop there, or this garlic and tomato bed that I'm building here. Let's say the tomatoes all die. It happens. It's called blight. It can happen. It can happen to potato crops too, right? So I'm not going to be absolutely devastated because I'm still getting something out of that bed. Um, I'm still going to get garlic and orash out of this bed if the tomatoes fail, and I'm still going to get corn and beans out of that big bed if my potatoes fail. So it's a good way of building some resiliency into your garden. The other reason is I know this may sound counterintuitive, but the more you plant, the more densely you plant, the less you have to water. Because, and I know that makes no sense if you're just thinking, well, plants use water. But if you create this little microclimate of plants densely together, planted more densely together, it also traps the humidity. And that's really helpful when you live somewhere that can face drought conditions like around the Calgary area because it's dry there. But when you plant your plants all together, they do tend to retain their humidity a lot better. So that's another reason to consider companion planting. It's also pretty. Like planting, I plant calendula all over the place. It's a wonderful companion plant because it draws the pollinators in. And a lot of flowers are excellent. I like to say there's ones that you almost can't go wrong with. Marigolds, they're not just pretty, they are an excellent companion plant for pest control. Like just there's almost nothing that can't be planted with marigolds. Plant them like crazy. There's no such thing as too many marigolds in a vegetable garden. Borage is excellent. It brings the pollinators like no other plant I know. It does tend to self-seed, so be careful for that, but it will bring you your pollinators. Nasturtiums are great, as I mentioned, for pest control. Um, they actually, if you are a tomato grower, it's a good idea to have lots of nasturtiums around because they'll also repel the hornworm, which is one of the big eaters of tomato crops. And there's lots of other ones, but if you were to walk into this garden here, there's still, I've got calendula. I don't know if you can see it. See, there's a little yellow flower. I've still got calendula blooming right now. And because I always have calendula, nasturtiums, and borage in my garden. They're never without. There's lots of other ones, but those three, never without. Oh, and the other one, my favorite companion plant in a lot of ways, is radish. Um, Radish isn't, I don't grow radishes for roots. I grow radishes for flowers and for pots. Be, that is one of the best repellents you can get. I plant white icicle radishes. All like, okay, you can't see, there's a bed that's right over there that I'm going to be planting with squash in 2 weeks. Tomorrow, I'm going to be planting it densely with radishes, and I'm also going to plant corn in there, and I'm going to plant beans in there so that they're coming up. And then in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to plant the squash because those radishes, if you let them bolt and you let them flower, squash bugs hate it. And I used to think, oh, it can't be that much. And I remember I had some lovely squash that were doing so well over there by the geothermal tube at the end of the season, and I had some radish plants that were looking. The flowers were starting to look a little ratty, and I thought, oh, they can't be doing anything at this point. And I pulled them out. The next freaking day, they were attacked by squash bugs. So yes, radishes. If you haven't, I will do whole videos. I have like, if you go to the channel, I have whole videos on radishes. They're the most underutilized companion plant, I feel. And the hoverflies love them. The bees love them. My bees love them. Mason, everything loves those little radish flowers, and they're delicious. The little radish flowers are really tasty, and the pods that they develop into are excellent for pickling, stir fries. It's like a little pea pod, but it tastes like a radish. So give that a try. I'll show you more of that as the season comes along. So companion planting, crop rotation is next. That's important if you can do it. For instance, you're not going to do crop rotation in a perennial bed, right? Because they come back year after year after year. But if you look at this, you can see the beds that I have in front of me here. I am making sure that I am changing it so that it's never the same thing growing. There's a four plant cycle, companion plant cycle that's going on here. So for instance, this bed here, this tomato bed. This was a squash bed. The companion plants that were in here last season. I've got a fungus gnat around me. Um, the ones that I planted up with potatoes, this garlic bed, it had squash, corn, and beans in it last cycle. Now it's gonna have garlic and tomatoes. The next thing that's going to go in there is probably a brassica bed. I'll be doing brassicas in there. And then I'm going to switch it up and I'm going to do the potato corn combo. So it's going to be cycling through. We don't plant the same thing ever in the bed. We have a 4 cycle, and that helps to maintain healthy soil because of the, remember how I said the different drying and the different adding of things to the soil? Crop rotation does that. Pest control is another major reason for that. Because if you've got a crop in this, like say I had something in here last with my, maybe I had squash beetles in here. I didn't, but because I had lots of radish. But let's say I had a ton of squash beetles in there last season. If I were to plant squash in there, what happens is those squash have laid their little eggs and they're waiting for squash to be planted there. But I planted garlic in there and they're going, what the heck? I don't know what to do, right? Like it helps to confuse the cycle. If you keep planting the same plants over and over in the same place, the pests realize that you have opened an all you can eat buffet for them. Their favorite food over and over. They don't even have to try to figure it out. So that's another reason to consider crop rotation. Not only are you maintaining the health of your soil, you're going to help to confuse their little pests a little bit. All right, and then oh, this is this might sound crap. Crap is my last one. My way of saying manure, because yes, while compost is great, I always also amend with some type of manure. My favorite manure, hands down, is rabbit manure because it's like a perfect little time release fertilizer capsule right there. You put it in. It's a cold manure, which means it doesn't need to be composted before putting into the soil. I literally just lay it down on top of the soil. Along with the compost, and it does so many things because multiple reasons why manure is great. It brings a lot of those micronutrients that are hard to get from other sources. One thing that you never see on fertilizer bags is the sulfur content, but sulfur is really essential. And a lot of manure, the way that animals produce, they digest, a lot of there tends to be a higher density in manure of sulfur than a lot of other forms of compost that you're going to find. Um, Another reason is it's going through the digestive system. And in your digestive system as an animal, you've got probiotics. And those probiotics, some of them come out in your manure. The same thing happens with um, like a cow or a horse or a sheep or a rabbit. There tends to be more biodiversity, little wonderful things that we need in our soil in the manure itself. So you're building the biodiversity by using manure as well. Now, if you're not using rabbit manure, though, if you're using cow, horse, sheep, chicken, you need to make sure that that is fully composted before you go to put that on your bed because it'll actually burn your plants, particularly if you have young seedlings. And even when I know something is well composted and I'm using manure, apart from my rabbit manure, I put it on a couple weeks before I'm planning to put my plants in the bed so that it does have a chance to absorb and cool down a bit, literally, so that the pH levels aren't going up and down and up and down, and they're going to burn things. You want it to stabilize before you're going to put plants in there. All right, so I'm going to go through the 5 C's one last time here. The first one we talked about was coverings. So that's both coverings above the hoops, well, above the garden, and hoops are an excellent example of that. Or if you want to do cold frames, or if you're lucky enough and you can build a greenhouse. But if you can't do that, honestly, I still use milk jugs outside. Okay, because and I also use some as propagation chambers in here. It is remarkable how much that little bit of that little plastic milk jug can help to protect your young seedlings as before they're ready to go in the ground. And I still use them. Like I've got lots outside right now, and I'm going to be starting a whole bunch more tomorrow. For those of you who are doing a lot of winter sowing, I did want to say we're in March. It's March 1st today. Now, I know that in Calgary right now, we're still doing a severe Chinook cycle. That's not going to harm your hardy perennials at this point, but I maybe would wait another week before, like I'm going to be waiting in Calgary another week before I start doing my hardy veggies. Okay. And those of you who are in the group, and if you're not in the group and you're into winter sowing, you should probably join the group. It's on Facebook and it's called Winter Sowing and Planting Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. But honestly, you don't have to be from a prairie province. It's basically designed to help anybody who's interested in growing food in our harsh conditions. And it's not just about winter sowing. I don't want this to be a really restrictive group. I just want it to be a group of people who really want to help each other because I've learned so much from those 6,000 people who are in that group. And I hope that they're learning from me as well. And we work together. Okay. It's not one of those groups where if you don't follow the rules, no, we like to experiment, we like to play, we question each other, we encourage each other. So if you're on Facebook and you're into winter sowing, or if you live in a harsh a harsh zone like zones 3, 4, or 2, you might want to consider looking at that group. So on that group, we have these wonderful planting charts that my fabulous admin friend, I'm a fabulous friend who also happens to be an admin, Lorraine, created, where she's perfectly delineated out from the data collected from other members of the group when it's a good idea to plant things in zone 3. And right now we're in still hardy perennials. Technically, according to those charts, you could start planting your hardy veg and your hardy annuals and your hardy herbs tomorrow. But I'm going to wait a week in Calgary. I'm going to start tomorrow here though, because I don't have any Chinooks to deal with. So let me know if you have any questions about that. And yes, I will be starting on my hardy annuals and hardy herbs tomorrow. And I've got some fun experiments I'm going to try this year. Uh, I know that I still got a lot of skeptics about planting root crops. I have done beets and radishes, and I've done carrots in milk jugs, and I've done a way that before that works, but there were some issues with it. So I'm playing with a new experiment, and I will hope to have that published within a week so you guys can see that there are ways you can plant those things and still keep the roots divided. Okay? And we're also going to try experimenting with the seed snails. I know that's a big, and thank goodness, I've got some other group members who are trying that technique. So in the end, we'll be able to compare our results and maybe create some charts for that as well. So, I think that's about all the different strategies we talked about. We talked about coverings, we talked about compost, we talked about companion planting, crop rotation, and crap. Okay, so try to remember those 5 C's. They're all based on one thing, really, though, and that's biodiversity. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a really healthy city below ground where there's lots of nutrients being exchanged back and forth across all the various mycelium and bacteria networks, helping to make that. And worms. Worms are wonderful too. They're part of that city, right? And they also have probiotics in their belly. And that's why they make such great, that's why that black gold, that vermiculture is so great, is because it contains a lot of biodiversity as well and makes that nutrient in the nutrients in the soil much more soluble to your plant roots. It's pretty neat when you can actually see the roots. Like I love watching mycelium work, and it literally like feeds your plants. You can almost see it pumping when it's really growing, and it's so good for your plants, building that biodiversity. Maintaining the biodiversity above ground by having those companion plants that are going to bring in those beneficial bugs and also to help to deter some of the less beneficial ones. So I hope that was helpful. I'm hoping to be here next week. I will have my 16-year-old technical assistant with me as well. So hopefully we won't have the issue we had at the start today. I apologize for that, guys. But like I said, better with dirt than with technology. If you have any, this will be posted on YouTube. I will also post it. This recording will remain on YouTube. I will also post it into the winter sowing group and on my Hardy Homestead group. And if you have questions that come up that I didn't answer today, please do either put it in the comments in the group or on the video, and I will get to you. Okay. So I hope that was helpful. I hope you guys are all having fun getting your hands dirty if you are doing winter sowing. If you're not and you're just doing your beds, don't get your hands dirty yet because your wonderful little beneficial buds haven't emerged yet. You want to wait for that to happen. Look for the cues in nature as to when it's time to do that. And I hope that next time it's getting lighter and lighter, and we'll be able to show you more and more growth because we'll have better light in here because it will be light. I'm going to continue doing these at 7 p.m. And as you know, it won't be long before that's a light time of the day, and you'll be able to see more of the plants growing in here as well. If you have questions about the geothermal greenhouse, shoot them to us because we will be also showing you some of the ways that it functions. And I guess as always, I hope you'll take the chance to grow together today. Thanks, guys.